Welcome to Caucus. We are joined by council members Johnson, Keegan, Flynn, Clark, Robinson, sorry, everything is popping up, Frederick, Anane. We're also joined by our staff, Danielle Gillespie, oh, and Zamer. I'm sorry, you were in a corner, Councilmember Zamer. And we're joined by our staff, Danielle Gillespie, whose name I could say over and over again because we love her so much. Ethan Samuel and Brett Williams. And tonight we'll be joined by the school district to do a presentation on their budget. And I'm not sure if they are here yet or not.
They are here.
Why don't we start with them so they don't have to wait through things, and then we can get to the agenda.
Yes, ma'am. They're joining us as we
welcome, Superintendent Adams. Thank you so much for coming and doing a presentation tonight. And apologies on the shift to remote, but with the numbers the way they were, we're trying to stick with doing our council meetings in person, but there's been several members that have requested. We have at least one member that is quarantined, and we figure this is a great way to continue meeting as we have in the past without any concerns about getting each other sick. So I just want to note that Councilmember Romero has also joined us, along with our treasurer, Darius Janafar. I invited the mayor and treasurer and said if they would like to come and ask questions, and they would be more than welcome to. And I see our board president, Ann Savage. I see board members, Tabitha Wilson. I also was remiss in saying that Council President Corey Ellis is here. And also we're joined by Council Member Tom Hoey. And I also see with us Ron Lesko, who does communications. And I will turn it over to you, Superintendent Adams.
Thank you so very much. And we also have John Yagelski, who is sitting with me. He's off camera, but he is right here. He is our interim Deputy Superintendent of Business and Finance. And so he is joining us this evening as well. So thank you so very much for this opportunity. We are always excited and happy to be able to come before you and share with you our budget. And we've done this customarily over the past few years, and it gives you an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. And so I don't know if we are sharing the PowerPoint or is it going,
whichever your preference is. I could share, or I gave Ron Lesko the ability to share too. Just
okay.
Let me know.
So Mr. Lesko, did you want to go ahead and share the PowerPoint, and then we can go ahead and walk through that? It will be a joint presentation. I will do a few of the slides, as well as our board president, Ann Savage. We will kind of split the presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions. So we'll go ahead and go through the presentation, and then should you have any questions at the end, we're more than happy to answer those questions.
Did I do that correctly?
I just see a blue background with the school district logo.
Yep. That is not me.
Let me see if I give it a try. I have it on my desktop. Let me see if it'll pop up for me. Oh, wait. Did we just get it? There we go. We got it now. You just need to hit the presentation mode and we'll be good.
Good.
It's in presenter mode, but we're fine as long as everyone can see that. That's what matters, and so we want to make sure that everyone can see the information. So we will get started. We do have, for any questions, we've asked that people utilize our feedback link and go to albanyschools.org/feedback. And for more information, we do have our information posted on our website with albanyschools.org/budget. As we start with our guiding principles, we always look at our vision, our mission, and our goals, because this is where we make sure that our funding and our allocations align with our vision, which is to make sure that we are providing those engaging learning experiences for equitable opportunities for our students. And then our mission statement, making sure that our students have the knowledge that we are providing those opportunities and educational programs to provide them with the knowledge and skills necessary for success. And of course, our goals, which are to increase student achievement, enhance the delivery of quality instruction, build our leadership capacity and increase accountability, empower our families to support the success of their children, and then partner with our diverse community. Tonight, our topics will include, of course, the discussion of the budget development and planning goals, looking at the 22-23 budget proposal, taking a look at the one-time federal COVID-19 relief funds. Even though this is not a part of the budget, we do want to keep this at the forefront because we know that these federal dollars impact how we are allocating our funds within our budget. What happens if the budget is not approved, looking at our contingency, and then the two propositions that we have on the ballot and information for our voters, and then of course opening up for any questions that anyone may have. Our goals with regard to our budget proposal is to make sure that we are supporting the academic and the social emotional needs as we continue to rebuild after more than 2 years in a worldwide pandemic. I just want to spend a minute on this particular goal because a few years ago, namely 2 years ago, when we started with what our goals would be for our ARP funding and our federal dollars, we realized that those goals were much bigger than what those dollars would cover. And one of the things that came out of the survey that we did engage our community in was that number one was the social and emotional needs and mental health needs of our students, and thus those of our families. And so we know that that has been a priority, not only then, but even now as we move forward with our budget. We're also looking at how we strategically plan in a fiscally responsible manner so that we know that our federal dollars will end in 2024. And so we want to make sure that we are making fiscally responsible decisions so that we can absorb as much as we can from those dollars that we are looking at systemically maintaining, as well as those things that we know were only for a period of time with one-time dollars, and then we know that they will go away. So how do we maintain some of those services with regard to our general fund? And then minimizing the tax impact on any of the residents within our city. So what does the proposed budget support? It supports all of our current staffing and our programs. We are so very pleased that we have full day pre-K in all 12 of our elementary schools and in 12 community locations. We also look to maintain our magnet elementary schools and the dual language program. We've seen a lot of success with our community schools model and that initiative. We know that $4.5 million is right off the top of our foundation aid and of our allocation that comes to us. And we've seen success with that community schools model. So we look to make sure that we have those initiatives in place to continue that support with the schools. We also know that our students benefit from having a well-rounded curriculum. So we look to support band, chorus, and orchestra starting in the 3rd grade with our students. Our Albany marching band and the color guard is also supported by our budget. We are pleased to say that we have 63 athletics teams, as well as our intramural programs for grades 7 through 12. One of the pieces that you'll see later on in this presentation is how we are expanding that intramurals program into the elementary schools so that we are building a pipeline of our athletics program and building those skills for our students to be able to be competitive as they get older within the intramurals program, as well as interscholastic competitions. Our current budget supports our advanced classes, our AP, IB, and university in the high school. We also look at our CTE pathways, AVID for college and career readiness programs at the high school, our theater ensemble. Last year, we looked at expanding our AIC program, which is our Albany International Center and the Tony Clement Center for Education, 9 through 12. The social and emotional supports, as I spoke about earlier, looking at specific positions that address the social and emotional needs of our students and working with the mental health component. We have supported additional behavioral specialists, like school psychologists and social workers. We're also engaging in Ruler, which is a Yale University program that looks at the emotional intelligence of students and helping them be able to cope with different situations that come up. So it really does help us with the social and emotional support of all of our students. We also look at the instructional intervention positions. So we have added in math coaches, reading and ELA teachers and coaches to help support that delivery of instruction, as well as our culturally relevant teaching and learning practices, because we look at equity as a strength and a value. And so we want to make sure that the way in which we started that process was through culturally relevant teaching, so that everything that we do has a cultural lens to it, so that we can look at how we're delivering instruction so that our students can see themselves in that instruction. And then, of course, the restorative practices when it comes to our discipline procedures and helping students learn how to problem solve and look at those conflict resolution skills that they need. We have some new investments with regard to our proposed budget, and that's looking at some of the 6th grade staffing and up to 6 additional CDTA tripper buses to serve the new middle school feeder pattern. We also look at some additional English as new language teachers. So our ENL teachers, we're looking at increasing that number. We have a playground construction at Edmund O'Neill because due to the placement of Albany International Center and the dual language program there, we need to make sure that we have the proper equipment there for our students. And this is a separate ballot proposal. This is the proposition number 3, and it would support the purchase of land for the proposed O'Neill playground. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Additionally, security staff and equipment, looking at our custodial workers, because we do have additional square footage that they have to cover, as well as equipment for snow removal and school deliveries. I spoke a little bit about intramurals, but also we have an increase in our sports supervision, because as we return to regular competition levels, we know that we're going to need additional supervision of our students, as well as, the transportation needs for our athletic program. We have talked about our Hvac preventative maintenance program. We implemented that this year, and we will need to continue that as we are on a cycle of preventative maintenance versus just being reactionary, because those emergencies do happen. But one of the things that we're looking at doing is becoming more proactive through this preventative maintenance program that we're doing. And we have 5 pools in the district. A few of them, 2 of them namely, are offline. And we need to make sure that all of those pool services and those contracts are extended so that we can make sure that we have the use of all 5 of our district swimming pools. When you look at our staffing ratios, I think it's important to note that our projected staffing for the 22-23 school year, those numbers are in alignment with our 2016-2017 school year, which was pre-COVID. But when you look at one of the things to really that I call your attention to is the enrollment at that time was roughly 8,900 students, and we are staffing for 7,800 students. But if you see that those numbers are somewhat similar to the 2016-17 number, we knew that with the federal dollars, we would be able to reduce some of our student, faculty, and staff ratios so that we could accelerate the learning of our students. We know that through attrition, vacancies, and retirements, we would have to look at bringing those staffing numbers back down because the support of those positions will end in the September of 2024. And so we have to make sure that we are building in sustainability of not only staffing, but also services, even though the numbers may not be equivalent to that. Based on our enrollment numbers, we would need to look at what that reduction would be. At this time, I'll turn it over to President Savage to discuss our proposed expenditures and our estimated revenue portions.
So as I do that, I'll just mention to all of you, as I think most of you know, as we've come before you many times, that the predicting enrollment in the City School District of Albany is always a bit of an exciting challenge with the impact of charter schools opening and charter schools closing and refugee numbers going up and refugee numbers going down. Everything we do in terms of enrollment is always a best guess projection. And that's what the superintendent just showed you on the prior slide. And we are staffed at a very good staff to student ratio as we try and help our students recover their academic and social emotional footing after COVID. And as the superintendent explained, that is intentional for this period. And that is really what the ARP funds were designed to do, to allow us to provide those additional resources that we need for those students at this time. So for my slide here, the main part I'm going to talk to you about is the big picture. How much is this all going to cost? And as you can see on the expenditure slide that's in front of you, the big change, the big difference between the prior year and this year, between this year and the proposed year, is in that program, including transportation, right? That's where the most change is. And as the superintendent just identified for you, those are predominantly in staffing changes to support the students that we need as we bring people who have currently been funded through the ARP funds into the general fund budget. And also includes a number of aspects like the new playground that is much needed at the Edmund O'Neill School. The referendum, the proposition is for the land, but the actual construction is in the operating budget here. In terms of charter schools, I do want to draw your attention that the charter school payment is continuing to grow. We are seeing an increase in the charter school tuition plus a slight increase in the number of students. That's for this year. We do anticipate, I know many of us know Brenda Robinson and have been watching what she's been doing with the nursing charter school. That is not projected to open this coming fall, but the following fall. So that might have another significant impact on our charter payment for the 23-24 school year, but that will not affect us next year, which is what you're seeing in this budget. So that's where the money is going. And you'll see it looks about like what you would expect based on the things that the superintendent just described on the prior slide. So let's move forward and talk about how we're going to pay for this. As you will see, the big change here is in state. Most of you follow the state budget process, so you know that the state has been doing what they can to fulfill what we call the promise of foundation aid. There's essentially a formula that's run every year to determine how much aid each school district is supposed to get. And for many, many, many years, some districts have gotten significantly less, and that includes us. This year, we are shy $26 million this year, meaning 21, 22, $26 million off of what the formula would expect us to get. Next year, the state budget, thank goodness, will close that by about half with a significant increase in foundation aid. And then that 22-23 closed by about half. And then hopefully the commitment from the state has been to bring that gap, that foundation aid gap, to zero for the 23-24 school year. And that will help us dramatically as we know those ARP funds are rolling off. There's no other really significant changes here except for the property tax increase, which we're going to talk about more in the next couple of slides. So tax levy, as the superintendent said, one of the primary goals of the budgeting process is to try and reduce the reliance on property taxpayers in the City School District of Albany. Over the last 9 years, we have done a really significant commitment to keeping property taxes in check. We have not had over 2% in all of that time. We've had several zeros and several below 1. Some of these were rebated completely on top of that. So there's been a real commitment to really understanding the needs of our taxpayers. That said, we do believe that the best approach is a small increase each year rather than trying to hold flat and then having to deal with a significant increase in an out year. And so we did a lot of multiple year planning scenarios this year to make sure that we understood what the impacts were. We are seeing rising annual costs of healthcare, and while it's not highlighted on this side, the utility costs are also really, really significant for us, as I'm sure they are for you. For next year, we have some contracts that are renewing, and it will be close to $1 million of increase just on utility payments alone. And we are doing everything in our power to address that, as I'll talk about in the next couple of slides. So what does our 0.9% tax levy increase really mean? It means $50 over the course of a year for a house that has basic star, and 30 years for a house that has no star or enhanced star. Also this year in the state budget, as I know several of you have been following, there is a new rebate. This is a different rebate than the one we got a few years ago, which is a percentage of the existing star benefit, and it will go to basic star recipients with incomes below $250,000 in a graduated way, and to enhanced star recipients who are all eligible. So some portion of your star will be double rebated. You'll get it as star and then also as a rebate. I think I'm going to turn back over to you now, Superintendent, to talk about some of the one-time funds.
Thank you. So with our one-time funds, we know that this is definitely separate from the budget proposal, but it's also important to note where those dollars are being expended, but also what happens to where we are within the cycle. So with the SARISA funds, and that would be the coronavirus response and relief supplemental appropriations, we have $1.3 million in our 22-23 budget for the SARISA funds, not in the general fund. And this is the last year that those funds are available. And then for the ARP dollars, there's $13 million left for the 22-23 school year, the second year of this funding. And we have utilized those dollars in terms of 93 positions that we have in those particular funds. We also, and you can see the list of the positions there that we are looking at, the additional social and emotional learning for our programs to support our students, enhancing our summer schools so that we're not only looking at remediation, but we're looking at acceleration as well. And then after school extended day opportunities, and that includes, as I mentioned earlier, the intramurals for grades 3 through 5, and that's expanding that intramurals program to the elementary level with our community partners. So President Savage?
So we always like to insert a slide about what happens if the budget doesn't pass, because that's a question a lot of people have. I think most of you are familiar with this process, but just in case, I will review it. If the budget were not to pass on May 17th, which is school budget day, we have as a board 3 choices. We can put the same budget exactly up and just put it up again as a second choice and give the voters a second chance at it. Or the board can revise the budget. Usually that means shrinking the budget, giving something up that we think is important for students and putting it back up again. Or alternatively, we can go directly to a contingency budget. Assuming we take one of those first 2 choices and put the budget up for a second vote. So if it fails the first time, we can put it up for a second time. And if it were to fail a second time, then we must automatically go to contingency. If either we go directly to contingency or after a second vote to contingency, we have to comply with certain aspects of the law which describe exactly what we may continue to fund. And that would require us to take additional reductions totaling about $1.6 million. Those contingency budget reductions would probably include, they would definitely include specific cuts to specific areas, which could include some staffing and certainly some programmatic cuts. It does limit us in terms of certain student supplies that we are and are not allowed to use. And then most importantly, from the community's perspective, we're no longer allowed to provide community groups with space in our buildings at anything less than the actual dollars that we spend to keep the buildings open for them. So that is always a disappointment if you have to go to contingency. So we haven't had a contingency budget in Albany in a long time. I hope we will not have one now, but this is the process if we should have to do that. Then I want to talk also about these two additional propositions. There's going to be a total of 4 propositions this year. The school budget, which we've just talked about at length, these 2 propositions, and then the library budget will make 4, okay? So the second proposition is a $10 million capital project, but it's a specific kind of capital project called an energy performance contract that has absolutely no impact on taxes because it is a guaranteed relationship between us and Day Automation. We essentially spend money to improve our efficiency, and then we pay ourselves back with the efficiency gains because that we've achieved through better HVAC and better lighting. And if those gains are insufficient, Day Automation is guaranteeing they're backstopping that. So we know for sure that we are going to get paid back. And that is the nature of the energy performance contract. But that's about $10 million. Proposition 3 is much, much smaller. It is $1,800, not 18,000, not 18 million, $1,800 for us to buy these 3 small parcels that are located right next to Edmund O'Neill School of Excellence. 2 of them are diagonally across the street from the building, and 1 is behind. And they're all currently owned by the land bank. This is a wonderful use of the Albany County Land Bank to allow the district to access these properties to provide recreational and outdoor space for the students, who, the elementary students who absolutely need that space there. The next slide is going to talk about the board elections. It's turning out to be very anticlimactic, which is as of, you guys are the first to hear this because the petitions were due at 5 o'clock, so an hour and 2 minutes ago. And the only 2 school board candidates are the incumbents, Tabitha Wilson and Ellen Krejci. No additional candidates submitted petitions today. So the library, as I mentioned, will have a proposition. That'll be the 4th one. So the school budget, the energy performance contract, the small parcels near Edmund O'Neill, and then the library's budget. And they have not had a proposal for the last couple of years because they were 0. And in the library world, they don't have to put their budget up unless they increase it. It's a little different than school districts. But so they're going up at about 2.5% increase. There are 4 seats open on the library board of trustees and 10 candidates. So that was sort of interesting. It will be a contested library board race, but not a contested school district race. Stephanie Simon at the library will be providing more information. I don't know if they come to you, but she's easily accessed to provide more information. And on the next slide, this just walks us through what's left between now and May 17th. We are closing in on the date. We will be tomorrow at the Albany NAACP. We'll be at Cana next week. We have a formal budget hearing on May 5th, and then 2 more virtual community budget presentations that we run directly through the district and provide an opportunity for members of the community to ask questions. And then Tuesday, May 17th is the day of the vote. And I think I'm turning it back over to the superintendent to talk a little bit more about how you vote.
So information for our voters, we have a lot of information that we will be providing when our budget newsletter comes out, as well as different mailers. In-person voting is at 15 locations citywide. The polls will be open from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. We ask that if people want to find their location, including a searchable database, they can go to albanyschools.org/budget. Absentee voting, along with the traditional absentee option, the state has also allowed for potential exposure to COVID-19 as a reason to request an absentee ballot. All of this information is available at albanyschools.org/budget. At this time, we'll open the floor for any questions that you may have.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And if it's possible to move, well, maybe we don't want to do that. It's just sometimes hard to see the raising of hands. Does anybody have any questions for the school district? Go ahead, Megan.
Yeah, thank you again so much for your willingness to come out and spend your evening speaking with us. I truly appreciate y'all making the time. I know one of the things that has come up, particularly for my district, which for those of you who don't know, I'm the 9th ward, so I have my entire district is made up of New Scotland elementary families. And I'm just hoping that you guys can perhaps address, there are significant concerns around transportation, which was an issue, I think, for the district pre-pandemic and has become a major issue, not just for Albany City Schools, but for districts across the capital region, and an ever increasing crunch on CDTA to fill in that gap. And I was just hoping that you might be able to comment on how the budget sort of interfaces with a plan to ensure adequate transportation for our students in this next upcoming year.
So if it's okay, I'll start, and then maybe Mr. Lesko wants to add more detail. But essentially, we have committed to a full review of the middle school transportation scenario, which is where CDTA comes in. At the elementary level, we used to use a different provider, and we have been using a new provider for the last couple of years. And I believe, and it's my impression from what I hear from my constituents, that it's dramatically improved at the elementary level over where it was a couple of years ago. While there are still occasional problems, it's better. This year, of course, we have had a driver shortage that has been, as you said, consistent across the probably the entire country, but we have been working with First Student, and they have been increasing their hiring and adding signing bonuses and all of the things that folks are doing to try and improve drivers. And so that has been getting better. For CDTA level, which is our secondary level, we are adding additional tripper buses and reviewing middle school transportation to try and live up to the intention of having students have no more than a half a mile walk to their tripper bus stop, which doesn't affect your district as much, but it has affected some folks in Tom's district rather dramatically, where there has not been good tripper service to certain folks out there. And to make sure that our middle school routes stay at about the same length that they are in now. Ron, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I will. I think, and you covered it. You covered it pretty thoroughly. But it is entirely a function of the pandemic and the hiring problems that First Student has had, and that is fairly unique for First Student. You know, driver shortages nationally have been an issue for many years. I remember a few years ago, pre-pandemic, my father and I drove to Wisconsin, and I think in 3 states we saw billboards trying to address the national driver shortage there. That's not something that we've really experienced here pre-pandemic. First Student has been very good at recruiting drivers. What happened to us this school year is that right at the start of the school year, we were scheduled to have 91 routes for First Student. That's right in line with what we typically have for our yellow bus service for our elementary students and our special education students. And very, very, very late August, they lost 13 drivers because of their concerns about driving during the pandemic. So all of a sudden, we had to immediately reduce routes, and they just have not been, First Student has just not been able to fill those, to replenish its roster in this environment. I think it is getting a little bit better, as Ann suggested, but they're still not back to where they are. I think if they put everybody but one person to staff the phones on the road, they're somewhere in the around 80 or low 80s in terms of drivers that are available every day. And we all know that in any workplace, every employee doesn't show up every single day. So we're currently running somewhere in the high 70s, mid to high 70s in the number of routes every day. And you can see what that gap is between where we are and the 91 routes that we had built for the start of this school year. And just haven't been able to get all of those buses on the road because of the driver shortage that we do experience. And CDTA has experienced the exact same problem. You know, the problem in hiring people to drive the buses has been a problem for CDTA, just as it has been for yellow bus providers all across the country. There was a story in the paper today about North Colony and Ballston Spa, and certainly we've had problems. Every school district in the area has had problems this school year with its student transportation because of this issue with hiring drivers. As we talked about in the presentation, we have included funds in the budget proposal for this year to support 6 additional tripper routes at the secondary level next year. That would be primarily to make sure that the middle schools are served appropriately, but also to address some spots for Albany High School that we've identified too. So we are not as frustrating as it has been for our families, but it has been very frustrating for all of us on a daily basis. And we've shifted the start time for our elementary schools this year to try and accommodate that. We've tried to find other providers. We just have not been able to help First Student and CDTA get more drivers on the road. First Student in particular is at the top of the market in terms of how much they pay their drivers and their aides. They're in the mid-20s per hour for drivers, and I think around $14 or even $15 an hour now for aides. There's a $4,500 sign-on bonus for new drivers. So they're being very aggressive in those ways too, and in trying to recruit drivers. So if anyone knows anyone who has any interest in driving a bus, please send them the First Student, and they would welcome the opportunity to train them if they need the training, or to do whatever it takes to get them on the road. So I hope I didn't go on too long, but I hope I addressed the question there.
I'd also like to add that as a system, one of the things that we're looking at, just to piggyback and accentuate some of those things, we're looking at our start times. We're trying to make those adjustments so that we can have easier routing and even a tiered, layered piece of routing. So maybe there's a driver. So the example is that driver A may have 2 routes in the morning or 3 routes in the morning, so that you know that that position is filled, but yet this route covers more than 1 route. And so we're looking at strategically how we would be able to do that. So there are some things within the system that we can improve in the event that, you know, a driver may call out or whatever the case may be, because we know that those things happen.
Councilman Tom, go ahead. And I, just so everyone knows, I'm going to go right in order. So it'll be Tom, then Sonia, then Gabriella, then Deb, then Owusu, then Derek.
Thank you. We do appreciate it, and our taxpayers in the city expect to hear from us and explain budgets. And as a council, we do it, and as school board, you also have to do it. I'm a little bit frustrated that the presentation, we didn't get it till 3:20 today, and I was actually heading over to the high school. My son was running the track meet today, and they did very good. I'm very happy as a parent. I'm happy with our school system. There are frustrations, but I have gotten quite a bit of calls on the feeder system from Eagle Point Elementary to my son went to Hackett, and now my wife's grandchildren are going to have to go to North Albany, and there's a lot of stuff up in the air that we don't know. I know Ron, you had told them at the meeting that it'd be 34 minutes to get from the Eagle Point area to North Albany, but there's really no plans been advertised. And what we hope, and again, I'm not just complaining, I want to try to get out there that some of the stuff that we would like to see, and the people in my ward would like to see, is over the summer, a plan. When my son Max went to Hackett, over the summer, they spent a week ahead of time to get used to the school, get used to the transportation, so people would understand what's going on. And I hope that's going to be the plan for North Albany, that people who live here will know how their children will get there. And just talk about Eagle Point, we don't have sidewalks. And I bring this up all the time for 5 years now. Kids in my ward cannot walk to schools safely. So, this is a problem. It's not your problem, but it is a problem where I had to drop my child off at school, and there's traffic jams in the morning and real problems on a small road. So just wanted to get that out there. Appreciate everything that you're doing. I will be supporting the budget. I don't believe in contingency budgets. Thank you for what you're doing.
So thank you very much for the comment. And I know that we have absolutely planned exactly what you're describing, which is the summer transition camp, which actually that's one of the things the district has worked on over the last couple of years. You may not have been aware of this as a Hvac parent, but for a while, that was only a Hvac thing. Only Hvac had the summer transition camp. And 2 years ago, we added it for Myers. And this summer, we will absolutely have transition camp for all 3 middle schools. And they're already, and superintendent has the timing on this, but they're already getting into those schools right now to help, have guidance counselors and principals meet with children in their current elementary school to help ease that transition. And I know Ron and his team are working to plan on the transportation to try and get that out to folks as quickly as they possibly can. We do need that budget to pass so that if we know what we have to work with in terms of transportation, if the budget were to go down, we don't know what we would change, as Ginny knows, because I know she's been through this. When a budget goes down or when something goes down, we don't have the capacity to plan for the contingency until we need it. So we don't know exactly what we would do, and that would be a board decision about what would happen if the budget would go down. So Ron, I know he and his team, as soon as May 17th is done, #1 priority, and I know they've already begun this work with CDTA, will be nailing down those routes to make sure that that everybody knows, because people do need to know. It's a big change, not just for Eagle Point, but for many schools throughout the district. And every family feels exactly the way those folks feel who are calling you, Tom. So.
And I'd like to add, one of the things that we've already put out is during the week of May 23rd, that the middle school principals and the school counselors will be visiting those 5th grade classrooms to help get them acclimated and get to know their new students. Also, the week of August 15th or the 22nd of August, that's when we have our summer transition camps being planned for the incoming new students. And that's going to be, 3 to 5 days that we'll have that time. As much as we can, we're going to be doing parent information nights for all of our families the week of August 22nd, so that families can come in and have kind of a pre-open house with school tours and things like that. As you know, North Albany is we're doing the construction. And so it should be ready to go at the beginning of August. And so that's where we're planning, especially for North Albany, to have those tours so that people can come, and it'll be scheduled because we won't have, the whole school there at one time trying to do a tour, but we will definitely set aside some time for people to come and tour the campus, parents and students alike. And then, of course, the most important thing is working with our students as they are coming in, especially the incoming 6th graders, so that they can learn how to do their lockers, know where their classrooms are, have a time to get through that campus, looking at, I'm going to go to first period, then second period, and third period, just to help them get acclimated. So those dates we've already put out there, but there will be more detail coming from the school as we get more into the process. And thank you so very much for your support. We appreciate it.
And I just want to note before I call on Sonia that council members Adam and Love have joined us, and they actually joined us a while ago. I apologize for not saying it earlier during the presentation. Go ahead, Sonia.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation today. Very helpful, and very happy to see the planned investment for Edmund O'Neill's playground. I know as many constituents that used to have students in the dual program at Delaware Community School, and while they're very supportive of the move, one of the key feedback points I heard was that there was no playground for the little kids. So happy to see that. My question is just for my own understanding, with the increased positions for the pandemic relief funds, were those all net new positions, or were the existing positions that were funded by the pandemic relief?
So it's a little bit of a combination. Some of them were existing and they were used to continue the services. So for example, where we may have added reading strategist or math strategist to help close that gap and accelerate the learning. when we talk about social and emotional, it's not that we didn't have behavioral specialists. We added to that because we knew that that need would be greater. So we added to those positions. Where we look at new positions, when you look at the role of AIC, our Albany International Center, that being rolled into the general fund, that was also an expansion, because in the past, AIC was only secondary, and what we were able to do was extend that and expand that so that it is now K-12. So there's a combination of some of those positions that were used to enhance and continue those services and enhance those services. And then there were new positions that were put into place so that we could enhance that delivery, especially at AIC.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up to that, will those, with the increase of state aid, are you planning to continue all those positions, or do you have to eliminate some of those?
So this year, we were able to absorb about 105 positions into our general fund because of the increase in foundation aid. So we took those positions and they are now permanent positions. That is why we have advocated for foundation aid so adamantly, because it helps us create that base and that becomes our floor. And then we can build up from the floor, we can build up. And so those 105 positions are now a part of our base. So they are now systemic. They are in the base funding. The 93 positions that we have still left out in ARP, those are positions that we will need to look at very carefully to see how many we can roll into the general fund next year. But also, we know that even when we are fully funded, we cannot absorb those 93 positions. So there will be vacancies, and we average, roughly 30 to 50 vacancies and retirements within a school year. So when you think about that over the next 2 years, through attrition, vacancies, retirements, we should be able to absorb some of those positions. Therefore, we are not losing people. It is just dissolving those positions. And so that's what we're looking at doing.
Thank you very much.
We projected over the next couple of years, not all of those 93 going away, but roughly a third of those 93 being lost to attrition. And that really is about a balance of the needs of students with the needs of taxpayers. Those of us who've worked in our schools know that the need is almost infinite, right? We absolutely need those folks to provide the best quality education for our students. We absolutely do. Unfortunately, the state aid is not going to increase the way it did this past year every year following. And that means that we just cannot afford, without a substantial property tax increase that we all know is not something our community can handle, to maintain all of those positions. And so, as the superintendent said, the big work over the next 18 months to 2 years is going to be to carefully looking at each and every vacancy that comes up as people leave and or retire, to determine how best to fill the need that person was providing, and determine how we can do that, whether that's through continuing that position or allowing the position to go, and finding other ways to fill the need.
All right, Gabriella.
Thank you, and thanks guys for coming. It's really wonderful that you're able to be so forthcoming with us and kind of have this presentation. I, just like Councilman Hoey, will be supporting the ballot proposal. So thank you for that explanation. I have 3 questions and I'll put them all out there first, because I know we're taking up a lot of your time. First one is about just like the lockdown procedures with COVID. I have a lot of, obviously, students, but parents and teachers as well in my ward, in the 6th ward. And I've heard a lot about Myers Middle School specifically, but this is something that could be going on in other schools as well, that there's no recess, no outside time. They eat their lunch at their desk, and not a lot of socialing time. And that's, as everyone knows, really important for development and can be kind of detrimental for the kids. So I'm curious what procedures we can do, and maybe how you can work with the city and how we can help you guys to fill in those gaps that might be occurring right now as we're trying to balance COVID and schooling and classroom rules. And then my second question was about the dual language program, which was such a really cool initiative that a lot of parents kind of came to me to talk about. And there might be some issues with Spanish speaking teachers. And I wanted to know maybe how we can help you fill that gap as well, and how we can supplement that maybe with like creative solutions. I can think of some, but I'd love to know how we can help you guys with that. And then my third question was about the federal funds that we've received. And there was a chart earlier. If possible, I'd love to get a copy of that so we can kind of digest it on our own too, in our own time, because we did get that a little late today. If you have the numbers, how much has been spent so far? And then also, are we at risk? I know with these COVID federal funds, sometimes there's a risk that we would not need to return the federal funds if we don't spend it or if we don't plan it in a specific way. And I'm just curious if we're at risk of that and what our future plans would be. And if that's in the chart, you can cut that answer out and just say it's in the chart too. So, because I know it's a lot.
So no worries. Thank you so very much. I appreciate the questions. With regard to lockdown procedures, we have specific guidelines that we have to follow. They're posted in every classroom. They're posted in every building. And then we have a notification process that goes through our communications area. And so if there are further questions, then Mr. Lesko could address those. But we do send that out to families via our social media channels so that they get that information. With regard to recess, there's no recess at the middle school, secondary level. That's really for elementary schools. We have PE classes at the secondary level, but there's no recess. There is time for lunch, and then that is, kind of their downtime, if you will. And so they have ample time to eat, and they'll socialize with their friends along that way. But there's no recess at the secondary level. With regard to the dual language program and our Spanish speaking teachers, one of the things that we have been doing, and this is not just Albany for this kind of advocacy, this is advocacy across the capital region with regard to the State Department and looking at what are those things that we need to do for certification purposes to maybe extend the time that a person may have in order to get that certification for being able to teach a foreign language, et cetera. So those are the things, that's the route that we would have to go. If there are people who speak multiple languages and they would like to assist us, then we can see how they may be able to be substitutes in our system, because there is a background check, there's the fingerprinting that has to happen. So we need to make sure that those things are taken care of. I would think in terms of as a council, how could you help with that? I think that's that advocacy with the State Department when we're talking about that reciprocity of teachers being able to teach in our system, not just here, but also in the state of New York, looking at what that reciprocity is so that it's not so difficult and constraining, and that we are eliminating people who have the certification to teach, but there are just so many hoops that they have to jump through. It delays the time frame that we could hire them. I'm saying that excluding fingerprints, background checks, those types of things. If all of those things are clear and we're just looking at the certification process, what types of waivers can be in place so that we can go ahead and hire people in those high need areas so that they can be working with our children while they're still working on certification, et cetera, and maybe some of those other guidelines that they need to follow and other hoops that they need to jump through so that they can meet those requirements with a different time frame. When we talk about the federal funds, in answering that question, in the chart, though, we did talk about the federal funds and where we are in terms of what's left out of those federal dollars. And so we have $1.3 million for the next school year out of our Sarissa dollars. And then we have 13 million of the ARP dollars for the 22-23 school year. Now, that's just not free money, because I'm going to go back to when we started this process, we did a survey and we have our criteria of what those high needs are. And so when you look at the fact that the number one area of concern was social and emotional and mental health of our students. We made sure that we addressed those concerns with the staffing, with the program that we're using, that we're going to implement. Those things are addressed through those dollars. So all of the funds that were allocated to us, we have done that 3-year allocation so that all of those dollars are accounted for in alignment with our priorities. And those priorities were social, emotional, and mental health. We also had technology, educational technology. We looked at HVAC, we looked at safety and security, and also the accelerated learning. So those were the 5 priorities that came from our survey. If you go to our website, you can see our ARP plan, and all of our dollars are aligned and expended through that criteria. The other thing that you will see is many people feel that, oh, you have all this money, you could just use it for this, or you could just use it for that. No, that is not the case. There's specific criteria that outlines how we can use those dollars. So everything is not permissible under ARP. And so based on the 20 points that they have listed, we have to align everything that we spend for those federal dollars has to be aligned somewhere within those 20 key points and areas that are defined, predefined by the federal government as to how we can spend those dollars. And so if you go to our website, put in ARP, you can see our plan, which has been posted since we started this process and since it was approved. And you can see all of the allocation in terms of, developing strategies for public health protocols, meaning all of the COVID equipment and things that we needed to purchase. That was roughly $200,000. We also had work with regard to the operation and continuation of services for instruction and employing people for that. There's like $12 million for that. So each category and each piece of criteria is delineated in our plan. And so it's listed, it's right there, public knowledge. Everything that we are spending is right there. And of the 30 some odd million dollars that we were allocated, we have 13 million left. And yes, those dollars are already allocated because if you go back, that's where many of those positions, those 93 positions that we are holding in ARP for this next year, they are already accounted for in that $13 million, along with the intramurals that we talked about for the extended day opportunities, the intramurals for elementary, along with enhancing our summer school, and then of course the additional support for social emotional learning and mental health for our children. So I hope I addressed all 3 of your questions. Did you have any follow-up to either of those?
No, that was perfect. Very quick and really comprehensive. So thank you so much. I will, if I have more, I'll reach out to you directly, but thank you.
I will just add in that if you want to look at these slides at your leisure, if you go to albanyschools.org/budget, we've had them up for some time now. So I'm sorry they got to you guys late, as they obviously did, but they are definitely available to you. And there have been some ebbs and flows at Myers in terms of how the lunch has been handled. And I know that they are returning to some of the opportunities for students to be outside at lunchtime as the weather has been improving. So you'll see that among your constituents as well.
Go ahead, Doug.
Hi, thank you. Can everybody hear me? I was having some, yeah, okay, great. Thank you so much, Superintendent Adams, President Savage, the rest of the board members for being here and presenting such a concise presentation of the budget. I too, of course, will be supporting it and advocating to my constituents to support it. My question is about athletics. I'm very happy to hear about the increase of athletic programming that potentially happening for the elementary schools. I think that's wonderful. My question though is about current athletic programming, specifically baseball. Full disclosure, I am a baseball mom. Both my kids play for the district in middle school and high school. So I am on the ground, and since I've been elected, parents are coming to me asking me what we can do about getting a home field, especially for our high school. I know it's not a question of interest. I mean, I think like hundreds of kids tried out for baseball in all levels. The varsity team, the JV team, the modified team are all packed. There's tons of kids that want to play. We've been at the mercy, the varsity team of Palmieri. I've been trying to sort of ascertain what that relationship is between us and the city and St. Rose. It's not entirely clear. There've been a lot of cancellations due to, I think, staffing issues on the St. Rose level. The JV and varsity team are constantly competing for space to practice. It's demoralizing. I know it was a few years ago that I went to Albany High, but we did have Bleecker Stadium. We did have a home field that we were very proud of. So I'm wondering if there's anything we can do as a council, that parents can do to help advocate for a home baseball field.
I would start, and then of course, I know Mr. Lesko, you've done some work with Ashley Chappell with regard to trying to secure spaces for us. One of the things, I'm going to start at the very highest level with regard to a capital project. That would be one way of doing it, but that's like at the very highest level. What would that capital project look like? Where would the land be? How would we, what renovations would we need to do? What would we need to do in order to plan that out and develop that scope of work and then bring that to our voters as a capital project? So that's one way. The other way is opening doors for the partnerships like what we have with St. Rose. Maybe we have other partnerships with other entities so that it could become our home field. That takes away the capital project piece, but it also gives us a space that we could use as our home field and then work with some scheduling. I do believe that there are a number of community partners that would be willing to work with us on that. So that's something that if we could talk with Ms. Chappell and engage her with that conversation, as well as our baseball coaches. And then we could see what some of those partnerships might be before we have to take the route of a capital project. But definitely that's something that we could definitely take offline and then have like a subcommittee work on that.
Great. Now I'll follow up with you or whoever so we don't take up too much time. Athletic Director Ashley Chappell is fantastic. I've spoken to her. I know a lot of parents have. I know she shares in our frustration with this issue. So I just wanted to make sure we brought it up, and I'm happy to take this offline and figure out what the best moves are for us to do.
Perfect. Thank you.
I would note that when I was on the school board, we actually looked for, so one of the big issues is the land, the size that's needed for both baseball and softball. And we had a lot of issues finding, even if price were no object, that's one of the largest hurdles is baseball needs a really large size for that level.
And is Bleecker Stadium
it's
too
not
far
big enough.
Gone? It's no longer an option?
It's not regulation size, or at least, and again, this is like, now we're talking like 8 years ago, so I could be remembering wrong, but Bleecker is not big enough for baseball or softball.
That's my recollection also, that there was a size limitation problem at Bleecker. And that I will say that I had already prior to this conversation highlighted it for Vicki Smith, who is the chair of the facilities committee, that they ask if they, as part of their facilities work, as they evaluate, which they do regularly, the facilities for the whole district, to make sure that they were having a full review of all athletic facilities to see whether it's just baseball, is there anything else that we're short on, just to really understand what the implications are for athletics.
Softball.
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you, Jen.
Owusu?
Thank you. I just want to thank Superintendent, the school board members, all for being here today to have our annual discussions as it relates to the budget. Quite frankly, I was really excited for the high school and all the athletic achievements that's happening at the varsity and the JV and all levels. And, Ashley Chappell, I think, is doing a phenomenal job with many of the students, and also working with the coaches, and also with physical education teachers. My first question is more so with Is there any expansion for after school and summer activities in this budget that you'd like to maybe highlight? That's something that is really, as an educator, I always think about, prioritizing, when 3 o'clock bell ring, what are the kids doing? So I know that's a question that many of my constituents always bring up whenever we're talking about the school district, that, we need to prioritize 3 to 9 as much as we prioritize 9 to 3.
So the answer is yes, we do have some extended day opportunities. We have looked at increasing opportunities, not just for athletics, because like I said, we have 63 athletic programs that are happening right now. And we have even incorporated different sports and within the curriculum so that it ties to after school. And so like within the curriculum throughout the day, there are a variety of courses that a sequence that they go through. For example, cricket. Kids play cricket during the school day in their PE class. There's like a frisbee, kind of a frisbee-thon that they do where they learn how to, the throwing of the frisbee. There's a skill behind doing that. So within the curriculum, not only do we address traditional sports, we address extreme sports and additional sports. We have rock climbing and things like that. That's where we get the interest for our students to determine what is it that we need to do other than the regular 63 programs that we have. What else might students be interested in? If there's rock climbing, we have rock walls in the high school as well as in our middle schools, and not every one of them yet, but we also have them at some of our elementary schools as well. So that may be something that our students are interested in, and there could be a club after school for that, or an intramural activity. So we have a new instructional supervisor for health and PE, and part of his role is to look at, Mr. Gerardo, part of his role is looking at what are some of those things that we can do in addition to the 63 programs that we have after school already with athletics. What are some of those other things that students may be interested in that we just don't know yet? By exposing them to it through the curriculum, then that's going to open that door for that intramural area. And while we have the interscholastic competition, the competitive sports for our students at the high school level, we also will offer intramurals at the high school level. That's one of the things that we're looking at expanding in addition to elementary and middle school, and building that pipeline for students. We are also expanding our clubs and activities, and our clubs are student-based. So, I know you've heard about our robotics team that just went to the world competition, and we are ranked number 23, by the way, in the world, and we're so excited about that. But there are other clubs and activities that students are interested in. We just look for the advisors to help work with our students. And so, yes, we look at that expansion, but there's also a process for that, because we have to make sure that we have the interest from the students. And then after getting that interest, then we look for that advisor who would be willing to take that on. And then we can implement those after school activities. And that's not just for the high school, that's at all of the levels that we have.
Okay. And my next question, and I know you touched on earlier during the presentation, but the social and emotional needs of our students. COVID is impacting all of us. It doesn't matter what age you are, what your color, skin, demographic, what, live in the suburbs of Albany or live in the urban, of Albany. It's impacting all of us. Can you just talk a little bit more about what is being done concretely, intentionally to address the social and emotional needs of our students?
Absolutely. So within our curriculum right now, the way it stands, we have second step at our elementary level. And that is a period of time where the social emotional learning is done through explicit instruction. And so you look at, they may have one, that's where you hear about the one book, one school, whereas one school may select a book that addresses something with regard to social emotional learning. And then they examine that story, they read that story, and then students apply that story to their everyday life in terms of problem solving and conflict resolution. At the secondary level, we're looking at implementing the Yale University program of Ruler, which goes to recognizing, understanding, labeling, examining, and regulate and responding to our emotions. That is an emotional intelligence curriculum that we are training our secondary teachers and staff with regard to implementing that with our students. It is direct instruction on what do you do with these emotions? How do you look to solve your problems? What are some of the things that you may have in common with someone else? When you're feeling a certain way, how then do you manifest those feelings? Anger is an emotion. It's a valid emotion because we all get angry. The key is, what do you do with that anger? How does that anger manifest itself? Does it manifest itself in a way that's harmful to other people or harmful to yourself? Or do you take that energy and channel that into a positive way so that you can de-escalate not only yourself, but the situation that you're in? So these are all things and skills that we are learning as adults that we are teaching our children. So those are two very explicit things that we are doing. The other things that we are doing is, for example, when students demonstrate behaviors that are inappropriate and we do the restorative practices, looking at what is that re-entry. So for example, if a student has detention, if a student goes to in-house suspension, if they have out-of-school suspension, upon re-entry, what's that process of getting them back acclimated to being in that school culture and in that school community and feeling a part of that? Sometimes we have to establish, an adult that child may go to when they're starting to feel that anxiety. Then they have a designated adult that they may go to and talk to. We have ready rooms, and they're called different things in different schools, but we have ready rooms or reflection rooms so that when a student is feeling amped up and high anxiety, there's a place on campus where they can go to de-escalate with a staff member who is trained in those de-escalation strategies. That's where we engage our school psychologists, our social workers, our homeschool coordinators are engaged in that work, our behavior specialists are engaged in that work, our guidance counselors are engaged in that work. So do you need a little bit more? Because I can go on with this topic because this is something that's near and dear to my heart, but those are just a few examples to start with.
Yeah, and then the ARPA funds, I know that there's a lot of misconception that is free money that now, as a young elected and try to consider myself a progressive, I always try to whether push the envelope or try to think outside of the box. And I know that sometimes when you're dealing with the federal government, you can think outside the box all you want, but this is what, they want the money to go towards. Can you talk a little bit more about the process when you receive the money? Like, with the city, the mayor, the council, we all work together to put a task force together to make a decision on how that money is going to be spent, et cetera. And right now we're in the process of reviewing applicants. What was the process for the school district when it came to the ARPA funds?
So I'm going to go back prior to the receiving of the funds. When we were given the guidelines, I did sit on the committee with the reimagining committee that established part of those guidelines that we would have to follow. And so in following those guidelines, we had community meetings. We held forums for people to give feedback, both verbally. We had our FAQ with regard to, and that's still posted. All of that is under our ARP section. All of our information is there. The forums that we did where we recorded those sessions, they're all there so that you could hear and listen to that process. We held almost in the upwards of 72 meetings with regard to between the schools and the district, holding individual meetings as well as the district-wide meetings. We held in the upwards of 72 meetings to help get input from our community with regard to what that reopening plan would look like. And then what is it that were those priorities? So when I talked about those 5 priorities that came from our survey with regard to what our community, our parents valued with regard to how to spend those dollars, those 5 areas were the top 5 areas. And again, the results of that survey are posted on our website. And so when you look at that, then that determined how we were going to spend the dollars. That determined that. So instructionally, what would be the program? We had a committee that met and worked with different SEL, social and emotional learning professionals in-house, as well as getting input from other professionals, for example, NYU, Yale, et cetera, what are the programs that would best meet the needs of our children? And so we did have a separate committee look at that. And then the committee came back overwhelmingly with the ruler curriculum out of Yale University. And so that's where we look to implement those funds. Second step, we've already been using it. We've continued to use that, but we are phasing that out so that we're going to be using ruler K-12. When you talk about the additional support that students needed in terms of behavioral strategists and school psychologists, et cetera, all of that was data that we used from our suspension referral data. That was, we make data-driven decisions here in the school district. And so we use that data from our own, looking at what were the key reasons that students were getting in trouble? What were the key reasons that conflicts were arising? We looked at conflict resolution. We looked at problem-solving strategies. We also know that we're number one. We have a very diverse environment in our district. We are a welcoming district. So we know that our diversity is our strength. So how then do we look at culturally responsive teaching and learning so that not only are we learning English, reading, math, science, social studies, and the arts. We're not only learning that, we're doing it in a culturally responsive way so that our children can see reflections of themselves in the literature. They can see it in reflections of the history, of music, etc. Those things are the instructional side of the house based on the evidence that we have from the data of where our students are excelling, what are we seeing in terms of conflict resolution, how all of these things tie into our curriculum so that we can say, you know what, we're seeing a disproportionate example of, students being suspended, et cetera. And whatever that demographic is, let's dig a little deeper to find out why that group is represented more so than others when it comes to suspensions. Well, when we do that and we see that disproportionality in our face, then of course, we're going to look at those 20 pieces of criteria, and where it says you're going to work with social and emotional learning, we're going to put those dollars there because we have the data to support it. So the process was extensive. I'm trying to make it concise, but the process was about probably about a year-long process in developing what that would be. And then it didn't take a year for us to assign our allocations and the funding amounts. That was based on the needs that we saw through that data. And so through the planning process, that's how we were able to align those dollars and how they were spent, as well as we took a portion of those dollars, those ARP dollars, and we had an RFP process for our community, because that's one of the ways that we wanted to engage our community partners and our diverse community partners by looking at what is it that some of our community partners could do with regard to after-school activities, tutoring, mentoring, all of those kinds of things. And we were very pleased that we had about 11 awardees for our RFP. And it ranges the services that they are providing. Some of the people who were awarded are running what I call intercession camps. So like during the break time, they may have 3 days of instruction, and there's a whole list of things that they're doing, not just academic, but also athletics, social and emotional learning. They'll do games with the students, et cetera. So there are different avenues that each of these, I call them vendors, but each of our community partners are participating in through those dollars. And so we have awarded 11 community partners the ARP dollars so that they can help us with developing the whole child and meeting some of the needs. So it was an extensive process that we utilized. And again, our plan and our process is posted on our website. Everything is public and transparent so that anyone can see exactly what happened. All of our meetings are posted so that you can go back and listen to them and hear the process that we used, as well as the data is there to share what was used in making those decisions.
Thank you so much. And the Montessori school is doing a phenomenal job. I just want to say it's, the people that work there, the students that attend the Montessori school, nothing but positive, comments and statements from the parents to the teachers. How can we replicate another Montessori school in the city of Albany? Because really, it's a phenomenal work that's being done at that school, and it's really changing these kids' lives and perspective. So I just want to advocate, if we have the resources, to have another Montessori school in the city of Albany. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Derek.
Hello, Superintendent Adams and board members that are here. I want to say, as an employee, it's refreshing to hear that no one is going to lose their job. As a person who experienced that many years ago, it is something that you never forget. So, I want to share that sentiment, but I also am excited to hear about the intramural program. And I immediately thought back to high school when I played intramurals, and I have friendships that have lasted 40 years or more after we played intramurals together. And I just think about our youth and some of the obstacles that they face. I think that the opportunity to compete against each other will create some new friendships moving forward. So I'm excited to hear more about that, and not today. I want to just backtrack and talk about transportation. I work at an elementary school, and each day it is a frustrating issue that we deal with. But I just wanted to speak about Mr. Durrett Miles, who is almost like Charlie from Charlie's Angels, because I don't think I've ever met him before. I just talked to him on the phone, and he is on a daily basis willing to, try to figure out this puzzle that we deal with it. And I just wanted to make sure that someone said his name today, because he's a breath of fresh air for a constant difficult crisis that we deal with Monday through Friday. And I think that he was deserving to be recognized today, because he helps a lot of parents that, sometimes are waiting for the bus to come, and they're also trying to be at work at the same time. And we just appreciate his effort on a daily basis. So I just wanted to recognize Mr. Miles today. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Lesko.
I just wanted to thank DJ for that, and to completely agree that Durrett is terrific. He's been a fantastic addition to the school district, especially during a very difficult year. And I will make sure that to pass that along for you.
Go ahead, Sergio.
Good evening, Superintendent Adams. I just had a quick question. You kind of mentioned it briefly when you were responding to Councilman Anane's questions. It's in regards to the behavioral health for the school district, and just trying to get an understanding at what capacity is the school district able to service the students. If the school district is noticing a higher need for behavioral health specialists and outside resources to provide wraparound services to the kids. I'm not sure if the students already receive case management along with, some of the things that they're doing inside of school and some of those courses. And so just wanted to hear a little bit more about the structure that's in place for that.
So currently, thank you very much for that question. I do appreciate that because the wraparound services align with our community partners. We work with Trinity Alliance, we work with Northern Rivers. We have a number of partners that we work with in order to assist us with those wraparound services. And of course, it depends on the scale of need for that particular child. I will say that you saw in the presentation, we talked about what the budget supports, and I talked about community schools. One of the things that is so critical in our community schools is the fact that we have access to clinics and medical support in our community schools. That's not necessarily true in each and every school. And so that's where those wraparound services become really important. And those are the things that when we talk about that community schools model, I'm going to be honest with you, every single school in our district could benefit from a community schools model, because there are so many resources that are provided, like with our partnership with Whitney Young, with Albany Med, all of these partnerships that we have that are funded through our community schools dollars. If that particular concept were expanded to all of our schools, regardless of where they were located, we could meet so many more of the needs of our students, because zip code has no discrimination when it comes to mental health services and what's needed for our children. And it happens to each and every one of us in different ways. And so to say that one community benefits from this and another community doesn't get that benefit, I challenge that particular thought into thinking that we don't, and understand where I'm coming from. I don't think that there is a school at all that exists that doesn't need the wraparound services. It's just needed at different levels and in different areas. And so by the fact that that's what I believe and know for a fact, because I see the data that comes in, I see the calls that come in with regard to what our children need. All of our children need some services at some point for something. And having that community schools model available would really help us. So is there a deficit? I would say yes, because of that. But in the schools where we have those services available, it works. We can reach out. Councilman Johnson, you know that at Giffen, we are a community school there. There is no way that with the support that the school has, with the community schools model, that could not be done just if we did not have those services there. And so what that means is our schools that are not community schools, we rely heavily on our community partners that we work with to provide those wraparound services. So I hope that answers your question. But go ahead.
If I could just add on to that, you know, as a school, as a community school, we support the kid and the whole family. And in doing so, you know, we try to address the barriers that exist that are preventing kids from attendance, from whatever it is. And we try to come up with that. And I'll just say, I've been at Giffen for 10 years. When we first started, we had a 0.5 social worker. We had 2.5 social workers. And now we have 2 full-time social workers. We have a behavior specialist. We have a school psychologist. We have all of that that's dedicated to our building. So in real time, you know, all of the things that have been shared today, I tried to not to add on, but, you know, I lived this out all day long. And, you know, it's exciting to see when you look at the numbers, you look at the data, and you make the necessary changes. And, you know, if I just invite, you know, when the pandemic eases up, I would invite people to come and take a look at what's actually going on in some of the neighborhood schools that you look at as they may not be doing as well on paper, but if you go in there and you look at what's going on day to day, I think people would be thoroughly impressed. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Did you want to ask another question or two? Or?
Yep, trying to. So just as a follow-up, in regards to high school seniors, still on the topic of like behavioral health, and, you know, are the resources that you spoke about, those community resources, do those typically continue with the student even after they graduate, or is there a lapse in, you know, coverage as a student, you know, graduates and finish and complete school?
So it depends on what the choices are. So, and by that I mean, so students who choose, and let's say that they stay locally, and they will reach back, and we will still help them. We will still help them, you know, with the contact into the adult world and making that transition. Usually, for example, like Northern Rivers, Whitney Young, those services would continue at an adult level. But, you know, we also have to look at proper health care. So this is where I jump on another soapbox with regard to some of the things that we see in the school system with regard to things that our children need are not, it's not precipitated by the school. It's precipitated by events that happen in their life. It could be trauma, it could be inappropriate, or I shouldn't say inappropriate, lack of appropriate health care. It could be unemployment, it could be, social justice issues. All of those things play a part in how we can help service our children. And so once they graduate, it depends on where they are going. If they're going out of state, we may be able to assist them once they matriculate to another college campus. What are the resources that are there? We do that type of extension, but what we would do is we would try to connect them to those services as an adult that they would need, because the services of the school district no longer apply in many situations. But as you know, with some of our special education students, they are with us until 21, and then we can assist them a little bit longer. But for the general population, it would be a matter of us connecting them with those resources that they would need as an adult.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Owusu, and then we'll wrap up.
Oh, just last one. It's about the digital divide. In the city of Albany, 1/3 of residents don't have access to the internet. Is there something in the budget that address this moving forward to make sure that our students, if COVID-19 rears its ugly head again, that we have the resources to provide to our students?
So within our educational technology use of funds, number one, we are a one-to-one district. All of our students, we have one-to-one Chromebooks. But the other thing that we did throughout COVID-19, we partnered with different providers to be able to provide internet for our families. If there are families, and I say this continuously, if there are families who do not have internet access, they need to contact their school. We still have hotspots that have not been issued to them. We still have access to getting them that internet connectivity should they need that, because we did that along the way in COVID. So there should be no reason that our students do not have internet connection. And if they are experiencing that, then they need to contact their principal so that we can work with those families individually.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to thank you so much for coming in and for all of the information and all the work that you guys do. And a side note to the not super exciting, but so necessary HVAC thing, because that, I don't think people understand how much that haunts every single building. So as silly as that sounds, that is so important. And kids can't learn in a super hot classroom or in a super cold classroom. So I'm just, there's a lot of wonderful inventive things in there that I think people have noted and brought up, but I wanted to bring up the HVAC because that's so vital. And also something that was not always done well over the years. I definitely have seen whole HVAC systems that aren't around anymore, to be clear, but were completely held together with duct tape.
Yeah. So Gina, thanks for bringing that up in particular. I know that you were really effective in your work when you were on the school board about trying to rebuild Albany High. And once Albany High is done and we complete the current 5-year facilities plan, every single space in every single building that has students in it, sorry, superintendent, every single building that has students in it will have full air conditioning. There is no other district, I think probably in New York State, maybe somewhere on Long Island, but certainly no other district upstate New York that has air conditioning in every single space. We really do stand apart, and I appreciate your recognition of the need to do better with our preventative maintenance, not only to make sure that those systems are working effectively, but also to give our custodial and maintenance staff more time to do the things that they need to do. So by using external specialists to do that work, it really has double impacts. It makes sure the HVAC is working as best as it can, and it frees up that staff to do work that only they can do. And so I really appreciate your flagging that. Seems so pedestrian, but it's really important.
It's so important. And if anybody has tried to focus in a 90-degree room or a 55-degree room,
Yep.
It's hard to, and it was always a difficult thing to get around. So thank you for all of the ads, but just a shout out on that. And I think that the changes that are happening at the middle school level are exciting, and looking forward to seeing those different things. And it's, there's really great things happening. So thank you so much for your work. And we also really, really appreciate you guys coming in to talk to us every year. It really matters, and it helps us communicate with our constituents. And it's good to know there's things on the website. I know I like to share information with my constituents. So being able to kind of, especially the propositions, will be very helpful. And hooray for outdoor space too. I know that's $1,800, but it's so important. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time as well. Thank you.
So with that, let's move on to the agenda. We will be beginning that we don't have any local law introductions, but we will be voting on local law A from Councilmember Johnson. We have two ordinances introduced, 115122, which Jack, I believe that is yours. It looks, when I was looking it up, it looks like that is in the 8th ward. Do you know? I don't know if he's still here. I'll have it under Councilmember Flynn's. But that is a paper street, city of land. Sorry, that's selling part of city owned land to someone, and that will go to finance. I am assuming 125122 will go to Clark, which is the closing of Anthony Street, which everybody knows as the Colvin Avenue entrance to Westland Hills, but it actually has a name, and that name is Anthony Street. So Councilmember Clark, I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Yeah, I mean, it'll go to committee, but as Jenny said, it's came to be an issue with development projects adjacent to the park. So there's a question as to whether or not it's been impliedly dedicated or explicitly dedicated to the park. So in order to take away that question and avoid neighbors having to bring litigation or anything else, this ordinance would discontinue Anthony Street to the extent it is a street, and dedicate it to Westland Hills. And I've got a little support here as well. So he's being a little vocal, but he's in support.
That was an excellent argument on his part. We should have him speak more often. And I see Brett is coming in. I just want to confirm exactly which committee this would go to. Brett, are you able to opine on this?
Sorry, I was having internet issues.
I know. I was like, oh dear. The 125122, the paper street for, I'm sorry, Anthony Street, not a paper street. That was the other one going to Westland Hills. Would that go to law, buildings and codes?
Either that or planning, probably.
Why don't we put it in for planning, but we'll confirm beforehand. Thank you for that. And thank you again for being here, especially when you're not feeling well. Next, we have resolutions introduced, 465122, Kimbrough. This will be a pass. And this is to establish the work days for the our new council members, if everyone remembers, we have to go through this process, which I know it is a very painful process and can be a little arduous, but it's important for the comptroller's office. So that will be a pass. We also, next we'll have 475122R from Kimbrough, and that will appoint Shaniqua Dowdy as a marriage officer. Go ahead, Gabriella.
Oh, I just saw Danielle with her hand up before me, and I wanted to just flag that.
Oh, go ahead, Danielle.
The previously mentioned resolution is for one council member. I can't do the standard workday for everybody until I get everyone's record of activity. And so far, only one of the newly appointed members have provided the record of activity. So I'll be stalking people again, and then I'll do it for the entire council. And then for those of you who have previously submitted a record of activity, I have another form that you will complete just to certify that there have been no changes in the amount of hours that you dedicate to council business. So.
And I know for any new council members, I'm happy to answer any questions on it, or I'm sure any of the older council members will too. It's important to do, but it's also, I do vividly remember how not fun it was to do. So next, so it'll be a pass, 475122, the marriage officer, and we welcome Shaniqua to our marriage staff with Danielle. Next, in resolutions held, agenda number 3, 31, 32, 22R from Councilmember Ballerin, reappointing Roman Kuchera to the planning board. This is dependent on what happens in the planning committee. So if that does not, if there's any hiccup with that, then we obviously won't be voting on that. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, we voted on that.
Oh, that was on Monday. Yes. I'm sorry.
So
I'm reading through my notes.
With a positive recommendation.
Thank you, Tom. So we will be voting on that.
Tom. Sorry, Jenny. I'm on a phone, so I can't.
Oh, go ahead if you want to say anything about it. I'm sorry, Alfredo.
No, it was passed by the planning committee on Monday, so that should be moved forward.
Excellent. And then next up, we have resolutions held. Agenda number 4, which is 404222R, which will be the with Councilmember Johnson and Kimbrough. And this is the boys basketball team, and congratulating Isaiah Austin. They are planning on coming into the chamber. We will absolutely be in person that night. But who knows with the pandemic, but this is honestly one of the highlights to have, be able to have, especially students come into the chamber. So that will be something that we can look forward to that night. And big thanks to Councilmember Johnson for arranging this and getting them in so we get to see them. I just wanted to go briefly through our, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I had on mute, I'm sorry. I was kind of surprised about local law A that we're bringing it up. I know Council Member Romero was talking about maybe doing an amendment, or I thought we had I didn't think it was this meeting, so I just wanted to get a little bit more clarification on it.
It was passed through the committee, so it's ready to go. If the sponsors want to continue working on it, that's obviously something that can happen. And that would be, we do not have to pull it, but I know I had spoken with Councilmember Johnson, who was interested in moving it forward.
Thank you. After many discussions, I just find that, well, I'll just talk about it when it comes time to talk about that.
You can talk about it now if you want. You might as well.
All I suggested was something just like something I've been thinking about, but I have no intention of halting, I guess, kind of derailing the process after talking to the other co-sponsors. But I'll be able to explain at least my thought process on Monday at the meeting. But if the other co-sponsors aren't, we're not editing the bill at this point. So I think that's the last vote on that.
Did you want to add anything to that, Jared?
Well, just when it's time to speak, I'm interested in hearing what Councilwoman Romero, has to offer. I just felt like we're at the ninth inning. We went through committee meetings and people had a chance to speak, and we've been reaching out to it's been conversations going back and forth, but it hasn't really been full circle, let's just say that. And so whenever you want me to just start talking about local,
I think now would be the perfect time.
So I think that one of our many roles as council people is to come up with solutions to difficult parts of this process. And for my first 4 years, there was a lot of frustrations, and when you get calls from residents, regarding issues in the streets, trash pickup, it's various concerns that community members have. And when you first go through this process and you meet with the mayor, they ask you to reach out to them and make them aware of the things that they don't know. And my personal experience is, when you first address the concern, a lot of times it was received and they tried to answer it before they even did any type of investigating to what was being shared with them. And it was frustrating for me because, I feel like one of the main things that we have to do is support the concerns of our constituents. And so, it was my own experience initially. And then as I watched my colleagues, I saw other people having similar experiences. And, when you have these experiences, I will watch throughout the whole process, people were more frustrated because they couldn't get in contact with the mayor or they couldn't get in contact with commissioners. So in return, whoever is your council person, a lot of times that phone started to receive a bunch of phone calls. So when I looked at the process and I started hearing some of the things that were shared with me by employees of the city, I looked at the process. The mayor has to get reelected every 4 years. Council people have to get reelected every 4 years. But I looked at the commissioner's route, and it was really the only accountability. They were held accountable by the mayor. And so, and when I looked at, and it wasn't just me who sponsored this. We thought that this was a good idea. It was a good idea, not that we would be taking someone's job. It would be a good idea for the message to be received by anyone who accepted a commissioner's job, with the understanding that every 4 years you're going to have to go in front of these 15 group body. And with that understanding that it would motivate a person to be in good standing with that group, because that group is reflective of the whole city. And so as I listen to the pushback, I just hear a lot of worst case scenarios. And, just from a personal standpoint, I'm left to deal with a lot of worst case scenarios that residents reach out to me constantly about. And so when I think about what the local law A can do, I'm witnessing it already, because since we've been having these conversations about local law A, I have community key players that, they take it upon themselves to reach out to DGS or, a number of agencies throughout the city. And, in the last month or two, a lot of those calls have been getting responded to, and that's healthy. That's positive. You're going to hear the equity agenda. You're going to hear that in the next year. The equity agenda was needed because of the lack of consistency with the services throughout the city. You know, I've lived in Albany for a long time, and things, you know, like I talk to people, and nobody ever thought that the roads could get worse than when Jerry Jennings was the mayor. But, you know, when we look at it throughout the whole city, it used to be in concentrated areas. But now when you travel throughout the whole city, you see that other areas are having similar experiences that we are having. And so my hope and my spirit of this resolution was to inspire commissioners to be more respondent to the needs and the concerns of the community, to be better workers with the council people, the men and women of the council, because, you know, we're stuck in the middle a lot of times. And so and I felt in the last 4 years, a lot of times we were left holding the bag because, you know, once 5 o'clock hits, or no, all day long, the mayor's office is automated. So, you know, people a lot of times call and they never talk to a live, a human person, and that drives them to us. So what I'm proposing and what we're proposing is that we not make an executive decision for the community. What we are proposing is that we put this in front of the people and let them speak for themselves, because throughout Albany is 15 wards, and each ward you have people that have different experiences. And so for the amount of calls, for the amount of conversations that I go through, from the amount of concerns that are shared, it is important that we have a system that provides people with the credibility to know that their concerns are being taken serious at all times. So that is the motivation coming from Derek Johnson. I think local law A would be beneficial to many of the employees of the city, because we've received a lot of calls from them about their concerns. And at a time when we just heard the school district say that it's they're having a tough time filling positions, and we've heard from HR say a number of times how hard it is to fill positions. I think that it's important that our workers know that they have council people that, you know, hear their concerns and champion them, and they should be in a position where those concerns aren't met with, you know, a deaf ear, or, you know, unable, you know, a situation where we're not able to come to a resolution. So I feel like local A is a much needed addition to this new city. We're going in, you know, if you look at the leadership of the city, we are being led by someone that is not from Albany. If you look at a number of the commissioners, they're not from Albany, so they don't have the built-in relationships that a native Albanian would have. You know, people used to be able to bump into the commissioner at the local market, and sometimes now they're bumping into them and they don't even know who they are. So, you know, please understand that it's a lot of passion that was put into this resolution, because it's a lot of people that for so long have been getting overlooked and not responded to in the manner that is needed. So please, I would ask all my colleagues to consider supporting this. It's much needed, and thank you for your time.
Go ahead, Deb.
I just wanted to ask, first of all, Councilmember Johnson, that was eloquent, and I appreciate it. And I don't think it's a secret that Councilmember Johnson is like a big brother to me. And so he's the one that I've been talking to. He's the sponsor I've been talking to the most about this. I would just ask to hear from the other sponsors. And if you don't want to do it, I don't want to put you on the spot. I'd love to talk to you in the next few days. But if you're willing to voice how you feel and why you feel this is necessary, I would appreciate it. And if you don't want to do it in this space, I totally respect that.
I know that Tom is one of the sponsors, so I'll call on you, Tom, and I'll let you answer if you're interested.
Yeah, and I was just going to ask, my question was, because I pulled up the local law, the agenda, and I only see Councilmember Johnson is for both A and C, and I thought I was co-sponsors on both.
So I think sometimes that happens, but on the actual legislation, like when you go through, all the different sponsors are mentioned.
Okay. And basically, and the only reason I brought up, and Derek understand where I was coming from, I had heard from Gabriella that she had some ideas to tighten it up and make it just maybe a little bit, better, what she felt would be better. And that's the only reason I brought that up. And I didn't realize it was going to pass, but I'm supporting it. I think it sets a good example. We have, with the planning board, we've gone through for the members there, and we reappoint them, and it gives them a chance to come in and talk to us. One member was surprised because he didn't have a resume when we talked to him on Monday. So I even asked, I said, well, can you give me some of your background? And one of the comments made was, well, I was appointed already, but I wasn't on the council when you were appointed. So I think it's important, especially for new members coming in, to know who these people are. And to answer you, Deb, I mean, we went through the commissioners when, actually, no, we didn't. Because I was elected I started in 18. So a lot of the commissioners were already in place. So we really didn't get a chance to talk to them, find out, what their backgrounds were, what they're going to do. I don't ever remember. The only person we came close to not reappointing was the Al DeSalvo with the planning, and it was an 8-7 vote, and it was a real tough one, but it was good because at the time you'd walk into a meeting and the chair would scream at even council members and yell at us, and it was really, I felt disrespected, and other members of the council did too, and that's why that vote was close. But I don't ever remember anybody not being appointed. We want to work with the mayor. We appreciate the commissioners, the work they do, but there's a chance for us to talk to them and say, well, you could do a little bit better. And we all can do better. I can do better. I mean, sometimes, I'm always looking for self-improvement. And I think the way we do that, and why I support this, and I think it's important, it gives us a chance to reflect on what I've done for the last 4 years, what I plan to do for the next 4 years, and express that with the leadership of the city. And we are part of the leadership. We're the legislative branch. So I think it's important. So I don't want to talk too long. I know it's been a long night, but anybody has any questions with me, I'll be glad to answer, offline.
Go ahead, Gabriella.
Thanks. So my message earlier was about the way that I would go about handling this every 4-year meeting that we would be having with department heads. And I would have my own checklist of things and my own analyses that I would go through, which would include, communicativeness, whether it's via email or in-person meetings. It would include, and something that Councilmember Johnson mentioned, but how efficient are they in complying with the equity agenda? Something I'm personally very curious about, but something that we should be receiving regular reports of that already, but that's something I'd want to discuss with them at this every 4-year meeting. What are their hiring practices? How are they making sure that their leadership and employees are reflecting our city, i.e. creating a diverse workforce? And those are things that matter to me. And those are things that I think are really important for me when I ask a department head. But there are other things that other council members think are important to them. And my suggestion was, is there a middle ground of things that we could all agree on that are guidelines that department heads could keep in mind? For example, in my job, I know that as an attorney, I need to make sure very basically that I'm upholding the Constitution, the state and federal laws, that I'm making sure that every plea that a person enters into is knowing and voluntary, so that they see all of the evidence in their case before they make a decision. Those are obvious things to me, but and wouldn't necessarily be brought up every 4 years. But if I messed it up, it would need to be talked about, right? It would need to be discussed, and it would be a big problem. And so I suggested maybe we could have a general guideline of things that we all care about, but then upon further thought, I think that there are obvious things that we would all care about that we would generally agree with. Do we have to put that in the legislation? I don't want to derail something that is already going in a positive direction, because when it really comes down to it, and I've spoken to department heads that are nervous about this, every time I speak to them, I'm like, we are an objective and honest and real group of people. And I know you guys, but I don't know you. I'm new to the council, but we're not going to fire someone over something petty, and that's a concern that department heads have of like, oh, are you going to make this decision off of emotion? I couldn't see that happening. And I understand that people want to like prepare for the future. And I understand that because the councils might not always be the same way. But what it comes down to, though, is that the spirit of this legislation isn't even like keeping people in check. It's like, you are the head of a major department. I want to be able to speak with you every 4 years and check in with you every 4 years to say like, what's been going on? Let's just refresh. Let's keep it fresh. Like, these are the things you're doing. This is what I want to look forward to, and have those, specific checkpoints, so to speak, that I know I'm going to ask. I think everyone cares about those things too. But have that in the back of their mind. And I don't think that's a bad thing. There's so much negativity around like, but what if, like, are you guys going to fire me? We're not going to freaking fire you guys. Like, that's not what it's about. Having that power is important, but it's not about like being able to fire people at a whim. It's, for me at least, it's the check-in. It's the 4-year check-in that has teeth, that has real, like, hey, we got to address this, man. Like, there's some really bad things that are going on, and we as a council are going to bring this up at our meeting. And I hope that makes sense. But to Tom's point, to Councilmember Hoy's point earlier, I did mention creating a few general guidelines for both of us to understand things that we care about, and things that we will obviously be checking in with them on every 4 years. And so if people want to include that, we can. I don't want to derail something that's been going in a positive direction, but that, just to be clear, that is what I suggested.
I would just briefly say that it's definitely preferred. Sometimes it happens that we do amendments after the committee process, but we really should be doing any amendments either during the committee process or before it. So I think if it's something that more amendments are needed, which I don't know that they necessarily are, that really should be something we shouldn't be doing this at this point. At this point, the legislation should be good to go. And I just would request in the future, if anybody, especially if you're a sponsor on the bill, think about all of that while it's in the committee process and not after it goes through the committee process, because that's why we have a committee process. So doing amendments afterwards, coming up with new ideas afterwards, that's great to do those things, but that should absolutely happen even before it goes to committee. So while you're working on the legislation, or while it's in the committee. Ideally, you'll do it before it's even introduced and it gets to the committee, so that the that can really be worked through in the committee. But sometimes it happens, but let's definitely try to avoid that. And I had signed on to as a sponsor, so I'll quickly say why I support it. And then unless Sergio, did you want to go first, or did you have a question about something else?
It wasn't a question. It was just a observation to a statement. But
do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I was just going to mention and point out that similar to what Councilwoman Romero just spoke about, as well as Councilman Johnson, I think the spirit of this legislation is what Councilman Johnson clearly stated. There's really, I personally don't see any negative side to this legislation at the moment. But the spirit of what he just spoke about, I think, as well as Councilman Hoey presented, that this will hopefully and will create a high morale in our city departments, really. On the other side to that point, there was conversations for people who oppose this legislation, making it seem that the process of reappointing and figuring out who would take over for that specific department in a worst case scenario, just to mention that, as new council members on the council, when we came in, the city and all the department heads sat down and made time to meet with all of us. It wasn't that hard. They sat down, they explained their plans, their budgets, everything that they had going on to us. Very simple. They sat a meeting, we all met, we discussed these things, we had the opportunity to ask questions, and now we're at a point where most of the council members now feel confident with the commissioners that are in their position. So for whatever the reason is for why any commissioner would not want to utilize that as an opportunity to meet with us, to speak with us, for us to understand their vision, their goals, their expectations, that's a problem. Because at the end of the day, when I was running to be in this position, and even still in this position, accountability was one of the biggest things that was discussed about and talked about. For us not to hold these individuals to the same expectations as everyone else is unfair. And, that's how I personally feel about the situation. Councilman Johnson, this is good legislation. For the sponsors who put this together, again, thank you for this. And, in this time period, when it comes to the nuances of figuring out the hiring process for things, we have 3 years or 2 years at least to iron that out and figure those things out. So it shouldn't be an issue. And at the end of the day, what I do believe, even if the legislation is in not great form, is the fact that people, the voters, the people in the city of Albany should have the right to vote on it, and they decide. If they want it, they vote for it. If they don't, they don't. And that ends the discussion. So we leave it in the people's hands to decide. Thank you.
I want to explain why I signed on as a sponsor, and I actually think that it is good legislation. I don't think that it's bad legislation. And then when I'm finished, I'll call on you, but I know that you are not a sponsor, and I just wanted to answer Deb's question. So I wanted to point out that this legislation, the mayor has very publicly said several times that she is not running again. This legislation is not about our current administration. And in fact, that is our current administration and our discussions about, because department heads and commissioners have a lot of different things to do. They have huge jobs and they work very hard at them. Sometimes it's hard to be responsive. Sometimes, to be honest, we aren't the most delightful to deal with. And that has absolutely happened. Sometimes as lovely as the residents of Albany are, they are not the easiest people to deal with. So there's a lot of different things to deal with when you're a commissioner, and I fully respect them and I fully understand nuances of dealing with the public. And I know, being on leadership, we have had many conversations about different things that have come up with commissioners that this administration has worked with commissioners to deal with, and then sometimes worked with us. Sometimes we need to change how we're operating as council members. I don't know that every administration is going to be that responsive. And I know in the past that has not happened. That is why I support this. And the story that the main reason that I wanted to actually be a sponsor of this was that with a previous administration, my kids were playing at a local ballpark. And it just so happened that one of the commissioners of a department that had to do with children was one of the coaches, and they actually were banned from the field because they were heckling the children, the 6-year-olds, so deeply, so regularly, they were banned from the field. And that's the kind of thing, if you have a mayor that's in office for a very long time, there isn't any accountability when it comes to commissioners. It goes on indefinitely. And Mayor Corning, we had him for 40 years. So you could have had a commissioner for 30 years with absolutely no accountability and no oversight. That's unacceptable. We can't do that. The fact of the matter is, it's a lot more likely that, so you're looking at 8 people, because you have to have 8 council members vote against something versus 1. And that the odds just aren't there. I would also say that when we're looking at this, I know I don't think I'm the only one that also works for an elected official, but when you work for an elected official, for example, everybody remembers when the current governor came on, a lot of those commissioners lost their jobs. When you work for an elected official, you know every election cycle you could lose your job. It's part of your reality. Is it great? It is not great, but it's part of working for a municipality. It's not new. And this is an extension of something that we already do. We already go through an interview process when a new commissioner comes on. This is not anything new. We already do it. This is just kind of getting back in touch with them every 4 years. And this year, a lot of committees already kind of went through that process by having those commissioners come in and speak. One of the things that really resonated with me is when Councilmember Johnson was talking about this in the beginning, he was basically saying, like, this is something that we're doing anyway, and it's something we should do. We should be we should be getting to know each one of the different commissioners and department heads. We should be reconnecting with them every 4 years. So my reason for supporting this is because I don't have confidence that every administration moving forward is going to be as responsive as the current administration is when it comes to commissioners and department heads. That's a really big deal, especially if we end up in a situation where we have a mayor for 40 years or for 20 years, and we end up with department heads where there's absolutely no accountability, no oversight when it comes to their jobs. And I don't think that that's not acceptable. It's not ideal. We have a very, our entire system is very mayoral strong. I think it's important for the people to have more of a say wherever we can give it to them. I absolutely don't think it's appropriate in every single situation. We are all part-time people. We don't have the job. We don't have the staff. We don't have the time to have the same level of oversight. But this is a small thing, and it's an opportunity for council members to connect with these commissioners, to get to know them, to form relationships with them. And it's also something to ensure that you have that working relationship with the mayor, where the mayor's office would have to listen to you and would have to have some accountability. So that's why I support it. Hyde, you had your hand up. Did you want to say anything?
Thank you. I guess just a lot of the comments to me, and in my opinion, a lot of comments in support are about that it doesn't have to be a bad thing and that we're already doing it. And I don't know, I don't think we should, wait for every 4 years to have those conversations and to bring them in. And there's a lot of positive comments about how that went this year. So to me, I don't see that as a reason to support it necessarily if we have the means to bring them in and have those conversations. But I more had a question on process. I had voted it out of committee just because I felt like the sponsors had made the changes they wanted to change, and I felt that the entire council should have an ability to comment on this. But I also thought that there'd be more public comment involvement. Wanted a comment just on when a hearing would take place, but because it's a charter amendment, I don't know if that's by the mayor's office. So I was looking for
hearing. Yes, and Danielle actually has unmuted, so I'll let her answer, but it's a mayor's hearing, so that's not something that we do.
Yeah, because I guess
typically after the legislation is passed, I reach out to the mayor's office to find out what her availability is. For the public hearings for local laws, they're advertised in the Times-Union, and it's usually like a 3-day period that they take to run the ad. So we want to make sure that for those public hearings, it's a proper notice in the Times-Union and people know how to participate in the public hearing. So usually about 10 days, somewhere between 10 and 15. So about 2 weeks after the legislation passes, the hearing is typically held.
Thank you. So again, one of the comments was that the mayor's not going to run. So really, this isn't going to have an impact until election year 2029 and administration in 2030 potentially. And so for me overall, as a new member, I felt like the process was rushed. I don't think it's perfect legislation at this point, and those are just my concerns. And I never felt the urgency that was kind of pressed on us in terms of getting this done this year. And that's just my opinion on the process. Thank you.
Go ahead, Deb.
And I'm sorry, I know this is prolonging the meeting, but it's either tonight or Monday night, I guess. I don't know. But another question, and I thank you. I really, really appreciate, and I'm listening so carefully to every word that the sponsors are saying. My other question is, I don't think anybody was around. Like, I think we've gone through one confirmation process. I mean, if it passed in 2007, and the only confirmation process would have been in Mayor Sheehan's first term. Is that right? So no.
We did the. I know that we did Chief Hawkins.
Okay.
I'd have to.
So when a new commissioner comes on, they have to go through a confirmation process.
Yes.
Regardless, at any point. Okay. But was anybody around besides Chief Hawkins for the first confirmation process and the first confirmation process that the council went through? The reason my question is, how rigorous is it? Do we have standards? It's advice and consent. That's what the charter revision was in the early 2000s or 2006 or 7, whatever it was. The council has advice and consent, right? So do we have, or did we provide our recommendations for what we expect of commissioners, department heads? I just want to know how rigorous the process has been.
And we don't have any members, any of our more senior members here to speak about the first process, but with Chief Hawkins, it's similar to the way we've gone through doing boards. So it goes through the committee process, and then and of course, any member is welcome and encouraged to go to all the committee meetings, but also should not feel like you have to, because we all need to have lives too. So it's not necessarily a super formalized process, and I personally don't know that it should be, because I think a lot of it is, there was a highly formalized process in hiring a person. This is an opportunity for the council to connect with them and to get to know a bit about them. I don't know that you need to have some like a very high level of standards. It's really talking to them, getting to know them, asking questions, and perhaps having relevant questions from the different council members. They might have some specific things that impact their wards that they might want to know, something like that, or that they might want to bring up and flag. But it's really very much like the board's process.
Okay. It seems okay. That's something that I'm grappling with. I'm wondering how the council has used the authority that I know people fought for on the Charter Revision Commission. I've spoken to them, several of them in the last couple of weeks. So I've just, I think it's important for us to know how we can use the power that we already have if we're not using it fully, which I'm not saying we're not. I don't know. And some of the conversations I've had about with some issues with some commissioners or their positions that I agree with, that maybe a standard, maybe we can come up with advice before the hires occur. Anyway, that's something I'm trying to kind of figure out how we have used the authority that we got, back in 2007.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I was on the Public Safety Committee when we interviewed Commissioner Hawkins, and it was around a 2-hour meeting. It was public comment was involved also, and then he went before the full council. There was some, I think, more on the public side, questioning, somebody from the outside coming in. But I also want to mention that Sergio from DGS, we also had a chance to approve. And I was on that committee also. That was planning. I think it was planning, or maybe it was up. But anyhow, the process was pretty much the same. It was like an hour and a half to 2 hours, committee meeting, a lot of questions and public comment. And then we went to the full council. And Ginny, you might remember with, I think for like budget and stuff, did we bring somebody in? No?
No, because we just had interim. Nick was interim, but yeah, so we haven't done that. But Sergio was the other one that we did. Go ahead, Derek.
I just would like to add that I had a chance to talk to some commissioners myself personally, and none of the commissioners that I talked to had a problem with local law A. It was shared that it was another chance to get in front of us and talk about the great work that they do. And I just want to say this, right? Say that this was an election year. Say we were in December and this was an election year, and I don't like right now. I wouldn't feel like somebody should lose their job, because as I stated, when I'm on record saying that although we had issues with planning, I don't feel the same way today about planning. I don't think I feel same way I did about a bunch of things, years ago. So once again, I just want to go on the record to say that the spirit of this is to empower the people. The spirit of this is to empower the workers. And lastly, the spirit of it is to empower the council people. Thank you.
So I just want to kind of run through a few things quickly, and it would be very quickly, hopefully, because it is 8 o'clock, and I apologize for keeping everyone so late, but it's such important stuff. So recreational, so just to run through a few quick things that we talked about in leadership. Darius, did you want to say something before I continued?
Well, I just wanted to, a couple things. One, point on the chat that the legislation for local law A is not publicly available yet. So I think it should be posted somewhere on your website. And also, I don't think we have had responses to the mayor's 4 questions. I do want to point out that
met with David, and I went through all of them with him, and I deferred to him if he wanted me to actually put that in writing.
Yeah, well, I think they do.
He did not.
Speak for them, but
I would prefer to hear that from David.
I mean, verbally or writing, I think it will be important. I do have an answer to one of the questions though, that I can share with the body if you'd like. And that's on which other municipalities do this. The answer is none that we can find. Albuquerque, I sent this earlier to I think one of the council members who asked.
Seattle.
No, it isn't. Seattle, you can fire. Well, the head of finance you can fire. The council can fire. I think it's parks and then one other commissioner. But not police, not fire, not DGS. And in Albuquerque, the council can fire police and fire chiefs with a 2/3 majority. And then there's some more intricacies there too. But just so everybody is aware, that's some answers to the questions.
I did meet with David Gallen, and I went through the 4 questions. And as I said, I deferred to him if that's something that they would like in writing.
Well, I would, but that's just me. And
you're not him though. I know you want to be him, but he doesn't have the same flag game that you have
right now.
True. So I'm going to run through just some other things very quickly. We had some outreach from the Office of Cannabis. So there are some pieces that are moving forward with that. I would like to note that the state has not really put out any guidelines. So there's a lot of things that we do not have answers to. We are looking into whether we'll be doing a joint committee with finance and human rights or an ad hoc, kind of depending on rules. But one of the things that I would love Councilmember Romero, if you would talk with Dorsey, Dr. Pliers, she had some really great feedback when I spoke about what, like, your concept, which I think everyone agrees is important, but she just had some incredible feedback and ideas. And since this is something that you're passionate about, I would love it if you'd be willing to connect with her. And she said that she'd be happy to talk with you at any point. So if you wouldn't mind connecting with her to kind of help drive that discussion for the council, that would be really helpful on that. The police reform report that we got, we're going to be having them come to a Wednesday caucus. And we'll be touching base with the police chief on that to kind of talk through that a little bit more. We wanted to, normally that's something we would do in the committee, but we wanted to kind of keep that separate from the process of local law C. And I know that I spoke with Tom about it. There's a lot of it's difficult enough to schedule committee meetings to talk about a big piece of legislation. So since this is something that the full caucus would be interested in, or the full council would be interested in, we're going to do it at a Wednesday caucus, and likely we'll go through the agenda quickly so we don't have this at the end, and maybe start them at like 6 and really be able to ask some questions about that. I'm sure I am not alone. I know several other council members have gotten some outreach on the ARPA, several different things with the ARPA guidelines. So one piece I would say, the short timeline, a lot of the different pieces that are happening is because of a kind of twofold. One of them is the desire to get the funding out sooner rather than later. So the short timeline is really driven by that. It is absolutely not driven by council. Some of that's the outreach that I got, that people are like, why is council doing this? And I said, we're not doing this. We are voting on it. So they absolutely look at our schedule, but we meet every 2 weeks. So that's, you could just do it the next one. It's what the desire to do this is really to get the funding out sooner rather than later. And a huge thank you again to the council members that read through the applications. I know Councilmember Romero, Adams, Zamer, Keegan did it. And if I am missing anyone, please put your hand up so we can publicly thank you. I did that as well. It's a huge amount of time. So there's also going to be a lot of time going through the applications. So that's really the desire. And there are some concerns with the potential of midterm elections, how that could actually impact the funding that we already have. It's not unheard of when leadership changes for funding to be taken back. So not only do we want this funding to be out to get to the community sooner rather than later, because we need it, but also there's political concerns too that might be unfounded, but I think that there's a lot of desire we would prefer to have the money in Albany than at risk. Another thing is on that, the kind of timeline with the application. So it's a good thing because we had so many applications, but it became overwhelming. So we had many times the amount of funding, and it's something that it needed to close down so that there would be an ability to actually go through all the applications and fund them sooner rather than later. I would say certainly council has been advocating for a lot of changes that has been incorporated. I think if this process happens again, it will be dramatically different. Clearly, I think it was put into place. Nothing like this has ever been done before, so there's some choices that I think would be made differently, but where we are right now is really trying to get the funding out sooner rather than later. There's also, with a lot of infrastructure projects, that all of the applications have been looked at through the process, and with specifically infrastructure projects, there is a view to try to do those that are not funded through this, to do our best to work through actually trying to get them done through our own budget process. And there's also a lot of advocacy that the administration's been really great with trying to make sure that when there are some great ideas in there, to try to connect them with grants. So it's not necessarily just looked at in terms of the ARPA funding, but also in terms of what advocacy to do as many projects as possible, regardless of ARPA funding. Go ahead, Gabriella.
Thanks. Thank you, Councilmember Farrell. And I did send this to leadership, and it was something that I was concerned about.
You weren't the only one, don't worry.
Good. Okay, good. And I know I can't be the only one, because this is just like it's not even an issue that's affecting one ward. So I'm just curious, like as a council, how we can remedy this, because it doesn't seem like there's going to be a specific way of saying to these applicants that applied but that were denied. And in my email to leadership for full transparency, there were 3 applicants with the ideas that they briefly and generally explained to me were wonderful ideas, all from all the applicants originated in the South End and that wanted to develop additional projects within the South End as well, and that applied, but that were immediately denied. And I was a grader and I didn't see those applications. So for me, it was like, how we're missing such a great opportunity. So my question is, how can we potentially as a council or as a city really address these applications that were submitted, but that weren't given an opportunity to be seen? And can we give them additional priority for city funds in the future? Because like such great ideas, and even people that aren't like leaders in the community came together to create these ideas. And I just want to make sure that we as a city are acknowledging them, you know?
Yeah, and so I will say they did not, because as you know, it was a very dense hours and hours and hours and hours to read through them. So like the administration staff is absolutely reading through them and going through them and looking at them to see what can be done. And also to, there is in some situations possibilities for collaboration. So there is still work being done, and that's, the mayor has really looked at this as like a visioning process, which sometimes with granting can not necessarily be helpful. If you read them, some of them, you're like, why is this, $5 million? But it's also, I think, and I don't want to speak for her, but the idea that I've gotten from what she said is that she's very interested in this because she is hoping to get some new ideas, some fresh things coming through that's not just about the ARPA funds, but that is bigger than ARPA funds. So perhaps that's something that we can work as a city to help identify different grants. And I do know that there have been, those are active discussions that are happening within the administration about trying to make sure that there are grant funds or to work with organizations to say, okay, how do we help? What do you need from us to help go to the next step to help fund this? So they are not going to like lost out there at all. They're absolutely getting read. The difference is the people that volunteered to read, which were so appreciated, and there were so many people needed to read. It was a lot to do. Not everybody was given those. A lot of those were given to administration to try to continue to connect the dots on that. But I always recommend, so I had that same outreach. I mean, when I saw your email, I was like, yes, I've had that too. Definitely to say, I mean, it's not lost, and to keep in touch. I mean, it's something that if there is something that comes up, I think it's always important for council members to be aware of things, and because of course we can continue to advocate for it. But this is, I think this is looked at as an opportunity for rebirth as much as possible. So we have some incredible applications. It was hard to say no to any of them. And so I think that all of them were absolutely things that saying like, okay, we're not going to fund this through ARPA, but we're going to try to fund this through our own budget, or we're going to try to connect this with this. So it's not a full stop. It's the beginning of the process, I would say.
Quick follow-up. So what can I tell these applicants that are like, what do I do with my idea? Can I connect them with a specific person that will like help them
I can ask about that because I think that I have an idea of a person that you could connect with, but I don't want to toss that out there and have it be the wrong person. But why don't I ask, because that you're absolutely right. That would be helpful for me as well. And I think for other council members that are getting that outreach, that because we want everybody who applied and everybody who read, we all want the city to be better. I don't want anybody to feel like, oh my gosh, I did. You want the city to be better. Let's see what we can do to want you to keep wanting the city to be better, and let's make it better all together. So I'll ask about that. And thank you for that. Megan?
Just with regards to like the ARPA grant process, I think it's also really important to be clear about how proposals were reviewed, because we wouldn't have seen every single application that came through. It really depended upon what particular bucket that application was in. So I know like my team, for example, we had like 140 ARPA applications total, Ginny, if I remember correctly. And I think over 100 of them were in our bucket. So, but that wasn't necessarily the case for every other team. And so it depended upon what category those individuals were applying for, depended upon whether or not you saw that application. So I just think it's important to make that clarification, Gabriella.
Thank you.
It didn't necessarily mean it didn't get reviewed. I know from my team, we had, I want to say close to like 30 or 40 South End related projects that came through, and a number of them did get advanced to the leadership team.
I thought that we all received like a massive group, because I had a bunch that weren't even involved with my bucket.
Well, so I think, and Megan, that's a good point. So I think for the different groups.
Yeah, some of the projects hit multiple buckets. So you had projects that were both dealing with housing and workforce development. You had projects that were dealing with workforce development and public health response. So there was overlap in how certain things were assigned, but we did not see all the applications in each bucket. So it depended. And there were certainly things that came through in my bucket where they didn't mark off other areas of the ARPA grant proposals, and they should have. So, you know,
I think my distinction though was like the ones that were submitted after, I think it's March 1st. Like, remember there was the deadline, and then it was like, oh, hard stop a few days before the hard stop. And then there was a message about like a rolling application period. And I just don't know if those rolling.
No, I agree that those pieces were really quite confusing, although they were really clear with everyone that was applying for funding, that the applications that were submitted by that first initial date were going to be dealt with first, and that anything that got submitted afterwards really would only be looked at if there was still funding available out of that first pool. That was my interpretation of the communication from the city. So they would accept them on a rolling basis, but they were not even necessarily going to consider them for funding after that first date, depending upon what came through in that first pile. So, you know, I think there are certainly some other conversations that we should be having around equity. I mean, you had a lot of very small nonprofits who are doing really amazing things on a shoestring budget, who probably have never had any grant writing experience at all, and who are predominantly nonprofits who are being run by folks of color. And I think if we ever were to do this process again, we also need to think about providing sort of that upfront professional development component about how this should be done. Because it's not, I mean, this kind of stuff is not something you can just do off the bat and do it well without having that sort of foundational experience. And that would be a big component of feedback that I would certainly give to administration in this process, because I think that created some inequities in who got funded and who didn't. Because you have a lot of large organizations that have dedicated staff to do this for them, that I think we're able to submit better applications, but are not necessarily always the organizations that are able to reach our most disenfranchised communities. So I certainly think that that's a huge equity component that we need to consider if we do a process like this again, or we create funding like this going forward in the city.
Just to that point really quickly, because that was the second part of my email, was the timeline, which Ginny, you touched on, that people told me that in the workshop that they were told that they can't get an extension of their deadline because of the common council meeting. And so to Megan's exact point just now, that people that have grant writers on staff are able to just give them the grant and be like, could you work on this and like finish it in a specific timeline? And for those that are really wonderful, doing wonderful work, but don't necessarily have a grant writer, an employee that's in a specific example, an employee that also like makes food and takes care of children, and also, has her own children at home, also needs to be writing a grant. I'm just not sure if there's any wiggle room or if the council can advocate for an extension.
We talked about it. There's really not. And this is what I would say is this timeline has been pretty public from the very beginning. So while absolutely I understand that this is a big crunch, it's also kind of like a paper, like you have your paper at the beginning of the semester, the different deadlines. You can either be writing it the whole time, which is difficult if you're not going to get through. I totally understand that. And I don't blame any organization that was like, I'm not going to go through and write all this if I don't have to. I totally understand that. But it's also the timeline was communicated where it's not a surprise. And the reason for it is to get the funding out sooner rather than later. And there's really, we asked about wiggle room, and there's, as I said, it has nothing to do with us. It has to do with the timeline of the desire to get the funding out sooner rather than later. And there are some specific pieces to that, that with the ARPA funding that the administration has. So it's based on that, and there was not any wiggle room possible.
The city itself didn't set the timeline for this. I think is also the critical communication piece. I mean, this is involved in federal funding.
Correct.
And so we have to disperse these funds within a certain timeline. And then those entities have to complete those projects and submit all of the documentation that we need to then submit to the federal government as to what we did with those fundings within a very specific time frame after that. So it's not as if we have this pool of money that we can just hold on to forever and really take our time with how it gets spent. It really is being driven by the federal timeline, unfortunately. And again, large nonprofits are used to functioning in this environment. It's not unusual. For example, the child care funding that came up with New York State, those entities that were applying for those billions of dollars for the equitable child care, they had less than a 30-day turnaround for their full RFP for those programs, from the date that the state announced the funding to the time they had to submit their full proposal.
Thank you for that, Megan. And I would just say quickly, another important piece that you touched on there is that another reason for this rushing through is they have to spend the funds. So they actually have to have time to spend the funds and do these programs, which I would argue for a lot of these, it's going to take a lot more than the actual grant writing. So if we shorten the timeline by giving them more time to write the grant, we're going to be taking away the timeline for them to actually be spending the money and doing the program, and then giving back information that's needed to kind of justify the different funding that is anything with federal funding is pretty dense. So with that, since we're almost at 8:30, which is a solid 3 hours of meeting, go ahead, Deb.
Very quickly, so quickly. I just want to thank you, Ginny. This was a extremely helpful meeting for me. I appreciate you opening up the floor for us to talk about local law A, for me to ask the questions that I felt I needed to ask, and for not, I know it's long, but for not worrying so much about the timeline. This has been extremely helpful to me, and I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And thank you to everyone that stayed on and for the important dialogue. This is, why we're here. And I hope everybody has a wonderful night. And I look forward to seeing all of your faces soon. Hopefully in person, hopefully everybody's healthy. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Jose,
Good night,